we'll just not show. But either way, the purpose of it was just to kind of show you guys that you can use found objects to create different Zentangles depending on the lines of the objects that you have. And what I mean by found objects is like a piece of cloth, or your pencil sharpener, or a um, pencil holder, scissors, stapler, pretty much anything that you can find around your house. So we're going to go ahead and get started today with the Zentangle method. We're going to continue our discussion. Last time we talked about landscapes. We looked at various landscapes, talked about what shapes we saw, where focal points were, and things like that. And for those of you that may have missed last week, hopefully you guys were able to watch the recording. If not, I should have it uploaded to YouTube soon, and I'll be able to send everybody the link for those videos as well, since I've been recording our sessions each week, so I can have it available, and you guys can reflect on it as much as you want. All right, so today is March 10th. This is week 4. We have this week and then 2 more weeks after, and then we're done for the winter sessions of the enrichment classes. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about auroras and rounding, as well as how to incorporate these 2 new tangle enhancers. And what I mean by enhancers is it's something to add on to just the not just the tangle designs that we've been going over, but how to what's the right word? Probably to spice it up a little when you're drawing. So today we will work with 2 tangle enhancers that can also affect your tonal values. Remember, we talked about how values can occur and how to make shading happen to make things pop out. Auroras are created by carefully drawing within maybe about 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch if you're measuring, or 1.6 to 3.2 millimeters, depending on how you measure, around the tangle's edge. This tends to create a line that mimics the edge's shape and almost kind of reiterates the outline of the shape. So, with the first image on the top, you can see that the tangle here are these swirls with some almost checker like patterns and stripes. And then the red line is actually the aurora. That is the outline of the shape, and as you can see, it echoes the shape all the way through. So to keep this going, this creates a line that mimics the shape's edge, and you want to keep the spacing relatively even all the way around. It can be difficult to start with, but you gotta draw slow. That's how you'll get a more accurate, same kind of edge all the way around. You can create auras in multiples, and even place patterns in them. Auroras are great for transcending from one tangle or tonal pattern to another. So, for instance, if you have a couple different Zentangles, or patterns that you created over the last few times that we've met or on your own, and you feel like it's just a little too cluttered at that point, this is where you can start enhancing it a little bit and adding this aurora. So I wanted to give you a point here on the bottom of this sort of kind of like organic cell-like structure, maybe. I mean, that's what it reminds me, and I'm a big science person. So looking at cells and stuff like that, and like bacteria and viruses always look really neat to me. But this one here, you can see that what the tangle looks like on the inside, and then there's that aurora, that space around it, and then there's these little like arm plant like things sticking out around it, right? And that's what you can do. That's an enhancer. So if we had just gotten rid of this, it would just be this shape right here. If we didn't have the aurora around it at all, it would just be these petals and these triangles with like little circles or eyeballs. I don't know what you want to call them, or bubbles maybe. And that's it. So you can see how we went from a very plain kind of pattern to making it more of a solid form with that aurora, and then adding these little like arm structures to it, and it ends up making it very organic and kind of creepy, but also kind of cool because I really like this pattern. um, and then of course there's that shading as well, so it makes everything pop. All right, so auroras can really kind of turn your tangles into something completely different than what they originally were intended. Now for rounding, rounding on a tangle refers to darkening the crevices, nooks, and crannies of your tangles. It is a very little detail that gives a finished and classic look to the tangle. Rounding is done with usually a pen or a marker, and it does bring dimension, weight, and depth to a piece, and can be very useful in anchoring a pattern into the composition. So for instance here, if you guys remember seeing this from the first slide, or actually the first PowerPoint that we've had, this is a pattern that I created, and as you can see, I ended up coloring the bottom part here and a little bit of the top just to kind of give it a bit of space, and it gives this very organic, foresty, fungi looking kind of thing, right? And so I felt like when I was doing this, that if I left it blank, just like the white space back here, it just didn't really feel like a complete tangle. Once I started coloring in the pattern and the background a little bit, it really popped. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to kind of play around with it a little bit until I'm satisfied. And that's what I ended up doing. Like, I could have easily probably colored here and here, and then I would have probably had to color here. But I feel like at that point, I'm starting to just fill in all the places and the blanks, and eventually there will be no space. So I kind of had to stop myself a little bit when I was creating this. But, I mean, this is something that you can do as well, especially with any of your tangles that you have created before. Um, so that's kind of what rounding is all about. It's kind of getting into the nooks and crannies and crevices of your tangles and coloring them in a little bit, or trying to see what spaces you don't need, and what spaces you do. So what I want you guys to do with your tangles here is I want you to create a Zentangle tile using these enhancers on the tangles that you are familiar with. Okay? You don't have to do this now. However, I want you guys to kind of start incorporating these enhancers into your designs. You can use the Aurora around at least one tangle pattern and incorporate a rounding on at least one pattern. And lastly, I want you to challenge yourself in using one pattern that you haven't really used lately. We've learned about, I think, what, 6 patterns, I want to say, 7, 8 patterns. Try to incorporate one of the patterns that you haven't really used lately into your tangles. You can also add any other patterns that you would like by just Googling Zentangle patterns. I mean, there's a ton of them online. So you can always learn more if you would like. But I wanted to provide you a couple different examples here on the right. So on this side, this person used pretty much a very similar tangle as what I had with these like fungi plant things. And then of course the bubbles here, and then these other kind of swirls. Very organic overall. And you can see where they had that rounding colored in random spots. It's not fully, but it is colored in certain spots. And then of course you see the auroras around it, right? There's maybe 2 lapped here. You could have 3, things like that. And then down here, this one is one that I did as well. So I did an aurora around this plant-like structure twice. And then I started to do these little organic shapes again. And I was starting to color it in just to kind of see what it looked like. I didn't finish it. But you can kind of get the idea of what it would have looked like if it was fully covered and colored, right? So I want you to try and, yeah, exactly. They kind of make it feel like it's almost like a sticker, right? You guys have ever seen those I don't know if you guys ever go to like anime conventions or anything like that. I'm a big anime person myself. But usually at like anime conventions, they usually have those stickers that tend to have like that white border around it. And it's very similar to that, basically. You can have it colored or you can have it white. I know some people have stickers that are colored with that border and then they have a little extra border around it that's white. So it just kind of depends. But yeah, it pretty much kind of looks like it's a sticker. But this is just something that I want you guys to start to incorporate a little bit with your designs as well. Okay. So the reason why we want you, or that I actually want you, to do this is to bring awareness to how much hand pressure you are using when we draw. When you draw with a brush and ink, for instance, any change in hand pressure will show as a change in the width of the line. The more pressure that is placed on the tip of the brush pen, for instance, the wider the line. So when you are drawing, if you are drawing with a small paintbrush, keep in mind of how much pressure you're placing on the paper. If you're drawing with a pencil, keep in mind how hard or how much pressure you're pushing on the paper. Sometimes when you have a pencil and you push really hard on there and you try to erase it and then it actually doesn't erase or it leaves like a little groove. Have any of you ever experienced that before? Where you pressed really hard on your notebook paper or something and then you tried to erase it and it doesn't even look like it's been erased at all, like you can still see it. That's because you use too much pressure. So practice a little bit and concentrate on making consistent lines during these exercises with adding the tangle enhancers. Experiment with taking very short, very thin lines by putting your pencil directly on top of the paper, perpendicular to it. So, for instance, if you had your pencil, and I'm just going to draw it on the board here, otherwise I would have showed you. So let's just say this is your paper, right? And then this is going to be your pencil completely on top, right? Straight up and down. Test that out. See how thin of a line you can create compared to holding your pencil at a 45-degree angle, right? What if you turn your pencil sideways and draw with the wide lead? You guys have seen me shade before and how I hold my pencil to the side a little bit. What kind of line does that give you? Experiment with it. And then what I'd like for you guys to do is if you happen to have, not all of you will, but if you happen to have a brush and some maybe watercolor or something, try to experiment with the brush as well. Try to see how thin of a line you can create versus how thick of a line you can create. The whole point of that exercise is to have you practice with your pressure and how much pressure you're placing on the paper. Anybody have any questions about Aurora's rounding at all? Okay, perfect. So we're going to go ahead and move on to balancing, harmony, and variety. So the balance of harmony, which is actually harmony and balance are both sort of a principle of art and design. They end up creating a variety in a composition which helps create eye movement. So remember when we were looking at the landscapes last week, we were talking about the shapes and where does our eye move and where does our eye rest. I believe we looked at Van Gogh, and Van Gogh's very famous for this kind of balancing harmony and variety to help create movement across his piece by those brush strokes. Obviously, the one that comes to mind for me is usually Starry Night. That is the most famous out of all of his paintings. Aside from, I think, the wheat fields, which was something similar to what we looked at. But I'm talking about the last painting that he ever created before he passed on. And it was called the wheat fields, I believe. Um, but with Starry Night, if you guys can kind of picture it in your mind, in your mind's eye a little bit, you guys see those swirls of the sky, the stars. You even see the swirls of the town and the mountain, right? Um, that the way those swirls are, he could have easily just painted something very realistic and very straight and pretty much as if you were looking out of a window. But instead, with him, he wanted to create that movement. And in order to create that movement, that dealt with the lines being created, those swirl lines, those squiggly lines. And that helped create that movement that he was searching for. And that's something that he incorporated in his drawings and paintings throughout his life. Before that, he was painting like almost realistic style, very flat, not so much with movement. And then as he grew and as he experimented, he slowly turned into sort of this swirly compositions, which is what made him famous anyway. Um, so harmony is created by a relationship between different areas on a composition that create a pleasing effect for the viewer. The relationship may be similarity or similarly in shape. Oh, excuse me, tonal value, size, or a combination of one or both. So, again, the relationship for the balance of harmony can vary with shape, tonal value or shading, the size, or a combination of all three, or one of the two, or whichever. The common elements need not be identical, just close enough to visually link. If the pattern is too identical, it will become boring and the viewer can lose interest. How many of you have ever seen a pattern or have seen an art piece or something where it just all kind of seems so familiar that it just kind of blends together and you end up just kind of looking at it for a couple seconds and moving on? Have any of you ever experienced that before? Personally, while you guys are thinking about that, personally, I find that some abstract artists make things way too wild that I don't quite comprehend what's on the paper or the canvas. And sometimes it's just a little too boring for me myself. I just kind of look at it and I'm like, it's splotches of paint on a canvas. Okay. And then I move on. So, I mean, I would think that abstract art is very similar uh, to sort of that feeling a little bit, depending on what type of abstract art, what artist you're looking at. Like, for instance, if you think of Jackson Pollock, okay? Jackson Pollock is the guy that had canvas on the floor and he took literally like buckets of house paint, stuck his brush in it, and just dribbled it all over the place. You guys know, can you guys see what I'm talking about with Jackson Pollock? He just kind of did a bunch of these dribbles all over the place. He added random stuff into his canvas, sometimes torn paper. He was famous because he smoked a lot with cigarettes, that he would stick his cigarette butts on the canvas and add that into the paint, and he would just layer it up. He would do like maybe, I want to say 10, maybe 15 layers of these dribbles of paint across the canvas on the floor. And then what he would do after he was done with that would be, stretching it on the canvas frame itself and then hang the canvas in museums or shows or whichever. But that's something that he would do. Now, with Jackson Pollock, he made it very interesting. He would walk across his canvas and paint all over it. You would sometimes see shoe prints and things like that on the canvas too. And that made things a little different. Whereas instead of just taking your paintbrush, taking a glob of paint and just smacking it on the canvas, he made it a little more interesting by adding these other kind of like these personalities, as I would call it, but really it's just, torn paper, string, yarn, whatever. But it ended up making his work a little more interesting. So variety adds excitement and piques the interest. But if it's overdone, it can leave the piece feel too busy, heavy, cluttered, and disjointed. So with harmony and variety, it's just as it sounds. You gotta have a balance, balancing harmony and variety between the two. You gotta have a little bit of harmony, so things that are echoing each other, but not too much of echoing each other to make it seem boring. But you also don't want to have a ton of it to make it feel like it's cluttered, disjointed, or too busy, because you don't want to lose the viewer's eye. And why are we talking about this in Zentangles? Well, with tangle patterns, the ones that tend to kind of give very similarities would be like the various checkerboard pattern like patterns that we have looked at before. A lot of them are very, very similar to each other. And you can use all three in a tangle, but you want to make sure that it's not the same pattern, and you want to make sure it's not boring. So there's going to be a balance between everything that you do. So this brings us to our first daily tangle. So for this daily tangle, we're going to look at Be Light, which is going to be our first one. Then we're going to look at Chillin' and Bales. And then we're also going to try and add at least 2 or 3 more tangles today. We'll see how far we can get. But to start with, we're going to look at Be Light, which resembles an earlier pattern that we just learned, which is flukes. So it works well to create harmony in pieces. So what I want you guys to do, I was going to draw it with my camera today, but unfortunately my camera is not working. So what I want you guys to do is, with your paper and pencil, I want you to go ahead and create a square. And just go ahead and do the steps that you see here. So the first one I want you guys to draw, you can do it straight lined if you would like, or you can do curved. It doesn't need to be fully straight or anything like that. It can definitely be curved. But make a couple lines, both vertical and horizontal, or diagonal in either direction, like you're setting up a checkerboard pattern. And then what you're going to do is, in one corner, and it's got to be the same corner for this first one. In one corner, go ahead and color it in. So you're going to kind of do sort of like a dot. And you're going to color it in. And then you're going to echo that shape a couple of times. So you can do it 2 times, as you see here on the board. You could do it 3 times. The one that I was going to show you actually has the lines break up in the middle. So for instance, here, let me go ahead and delete all this real quick. So here's my thumbnail, right? I'm going to do curved patterns to show you guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a corner here. And that's going to be my corner. Kind of like the scaly pattern that we were looking at. I think it was last week or the week before. And you want to fill that in. So I'm going to try my best here on filling that in. Let's see if I can't make it a little bigger here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line with a break in the middle. And I'm going to draw 3 of them. And then that's what I would do for every single one. So it kind of like feels like it has a little bit of a highlight, possibly. Let's just say this is all colored in. Same with here. This will get all colored in. And you can have it really far away like how I have it, or you can have it very close together. I'm going to try my best here to draw it as close as I can to what my mouse can handle. Oh boy. It's a lot harder to draw with a mouse. Sometimes you can add a line in the middle if you want, kind of like a broken line. The ones that you see in the presentation one are solid, and there's only 2. But you want to do that for every pattern that you draw. Now, I did want to bring this up here, so let me bring the presentation up. You can see here, there's different patterns, right? I believe this one, right, in a different direction is very similar to what we learned. Let me see if I can find what pattern that was. It's pretty much flukes, which is what we covered, I believe, last week, which is very pointy. It's like the pointy one. So it's very similar to that. You could also alternate them, just like this one here, just to kind of mix things up. You can shuffle them around, use different corners or whichever, however way you want to go about it. And then this one here actually puts all 4 corners together and makes it into like these really kind of big dots. So it's really interesting to see how this pattern can change just by what you do with it in the pattern design itself. So once you kind of have a good feel with it, with this pattern, go ahead and give me a smiley face and we can move on to the next one. But I want you guys to kind of practice a couple of these first. So again, when you are ready to move on, just give me that smiley face. My Rhiannon girls are quick. While we're waiting for everybody else, still keep practicing. Either way. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Peyton, I think you have probably the idea of the pattern, I'm assuming. But again, think about the different directions that they can go into as well, especially in incorporating it into your own designs as you go throughout this week. The next one that we're going to be learning today is going to be the chill on. So with the chill on pattern, this one's a little bit different. So again, those first couple of steps are going to be a little bit difficult. But the outcome is sort of like this I guess plant-like structure almost, or leaf-like structure. Basically, the way you go about this is, and let me just minimize this, and we'll delete this square and make a new one. So let's just say that you have this pattern here We've got right. We're gonna do diagonal, but you can do up and down if you want. But for this one, we're gonna do diagonal, right? And so with this pattern, what you're going to do is you're just going to take one side of the square, whatever side you want to start on, and you're just going to do a small curve. And you're going to repeat that. See how that is? So you're just going to do these small curves. Almost like almost like the half crescent or the crescent shape that we learned at the very beginning. If you guys remember, like our first time meeting, we did those. I think it was the crescent moon. Oh, that one was bad. Or like the crescent pattern, very similar to that, right? And then the next step that you're going to do is you're just going to do the opposite line. So we went in this direction, right? Now we want to go in this direction. As best as you can. This ends up almost making like a, like I said, a leaf-like pattern. So it's almost like it's like this. Right? And then as you see in the presentation, there's different variety of this pattern. And you can do a lot of the different patterns with this. Another thing you could do is if you have basically this shape, right? And this shape, you can do the other sides too. So it ends up giving us this kind of really leaf-like pattern. So it ends up being like this. Just to kind of show one. You could do something like that too. And then with this presentation, I mean, definitely look at the different variety. You can color it in and have the background stay white or have shading. You could just do one side, just like this one here. You could do these with just the center colored and then the background with the center colored. I mean, there's a lot of different variety that you could do with these patterns for sure. So once you are finished with this particular pattern, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. And again, as we wait for everybody else, keep practicing. Okay, so I'm assuming Peyton and Brianna and you guys are okay with this pattern, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next one. The last one here is going to be bales. Okay, so bales is basically what we just talked about by enhancing the other side. But what I want you guys to look at is how to fill in the centerpiece. So if we go back to what I was doing here, you basically just do the opposite ones, the opposite sides. Sometimes it'll form almost like the circle outline shape. If you guys can kind of see that in my terrible whiteboard drawing. Sometimes it'll form like the circle-like shape as well. And that's something that you can enhance with it. And then the centerpiece, you could just do like a diamond or a square, if I can talk, a circle in the center, whatever you would like to do. But I want you to take a look at these patterns here. So remember I said about coloring one side? You can definitely do that while the other side's not. You can do a couple of those echoing lines or auroras even if you want to. If you look at this one, this pattern here, I've actually seen this pattern in, I want to say mosques designs. I'm pretty sure they use a pattern very similar to this that lines like their floors or their walls. If you've ever been in a mosque before or have ever seen images of architecture, especially Arabic architecture. And then this is just the pattern very similar to what they were creating here with the steps, right? So you can definitely enhance this in a different way, depending on how you approach the pattern altogether. But if you look at all three of them, they're very similar to each other, right? They all start out with this kind of checkerboard like pattern or checkerboard like string. And then it's really just kind of doodling inside the squares and making them turn into these really interesting kind of patterns. And remember what I was talking about with the balance of harmony. You could use these three in your own tangle design, but remember, they all look very similar. You got to kind of change it up a little depending on what you want to create with your tangles. So while you guys practice these tangles a little bit further, feel free to experiment with the different patterns that you may have already created. I'm going to give you a little bit of a spiel of some other kind of and why we are doing these tangulations and these enhancers. So tangulations are another way to create the effect of balancing harmony and variety. Changing an existing tangle into one or two altered versions, as we see here with the bales. We saw it with the chillin on the right hand side here and the bee light. Just by changing them one or two different varieties, it ends up creating a visual link. The tangulations must leave the tangles similar, yet create enough of a variety between the patterns to create interest and draw the viewer in. So, with some of these tangles that we saw here, you can actually see the different variations, right? Actually, all four of these are pretty much a variation of the original pattern. You can change the size, you can change the shading of it, you can change the tonal value of it, and it'll create tangulations that are visually linked. Patterns contain enough variety when sprinkled among other patterns in a tile to capture the viewer's eye and interest. The same goes for other different types of tangulations, and I want you to practice these type of tangulations or create your own in your sketchbook. You might want to place them on a page on which you diagram the original patterns so they are easy for reference later. I'm not sure how you guys are keeping these patterns or not, but that's just something that I want you guys to do. Do we have any questions about balancing, harmony and variety, any of these types of tangle designs, anything like that? No? Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and learn a couple more patterns here. very briefly, and I'm going to try and attempt to draw them on the whiteboard. So if you need to enlarge the presentation, I think you guys can do it on your own. Otherwise, feel free to look at the whiteboard, but I'm going to make mine big. Hopefully yours is big. I'm not quite sure if it enhances everybody or not. It might. I don't know. So I'm going to go ahead. I think the last variation that we looked at, or pattern that we looked at, was the cadent, right? It's the one that kind of had like, we had like the circles and we did like the little swirl, right? I believe we looked at this one last week, right? Can someone refresh my memory? I'm pretty sure we did. Or maybe we did a variation of it. See how we're starting to do variations where I think I had this one doodled on at one point. Something like that, right? I'm pretty sure this is what we did last week. We learned that pattern. This week we're going to kind of take it a little bit further, and we're going to I think this one's going to be good. This is going to be called the Cirque Fleur. Little French in there, so let me spell it out. I'll put it in the chat for you guys. So fleur as in like Fleur from Harry Potter, if any of you've ever read it or watched the movie. And then cirque as in like circle. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our square, right? And we're going to go ahead and draw a kind of like a diamond shape almost directly in the center. But it's only going to be three sides. And then from here, we're going to draw a circle around it that'll touch all four corners of the square. So I'm going to try my best to draw a circle with one string, one line, that'll touch all four squares. So, good luck. That was close. That was close. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start with the top line right here. I just did a little X right here. We're going to continue this line up and make it into a swirl that'll touch and go to the center. Then what you're going to do is you're going to do the same thing on each side. So you want to follow the line, touch on the top, and then you can actually make it thinner if you want instead of being as big as this one is. I'm actually going to adjust this big one. Kind of exaggerated it a little bit for you guys. So, touch. And then with this one on the bottom, you're going to go this way. So it's kind of like if you guys have ever seen, oh, what is it? I just had it. Avatar? Have you guys seen Avatar? The Last Airbender? Yeah. So, this sort of reminds me, I think, of the water tribe symbol. I want to say it's water tribe. Or maybe it's air. It could be the air tribe symbol. But it's very similar to it. I think it's the air tribe. Oh, it could be water. I don't know. Maybe air is like this little swirl. I thought this would have been water instead. But either way, it reminds me of the show. just to bring that out. So then the next step here is just to... Oh, air has arrows? Okay. I don't know what I'm thinking of then. Maybe it's the Earth tribe has the squares, but I think the squares are like this, right? And it's like in a mountain. I don't know. I'm going on a tangent. I'm sorry, guys. That could be something similar. But um see, I told you guys I like anime and cartoons, and that's an American anime. Either way, the next step in this is to draw these sort of like bird like symbols. Have you ever drawn birds like that before in landscapes when you were younger, maybe more recent? Yeah. So very similar, except you're going to kind of echo the curved lines of your circle. So you're going to go down and you're going to do at least two. And there is your cirque fleur. So you can use this particular pattern as many times as you want. So for instance, I don't know if I can copy this. I might be able to. Can I copy? Oh, maybe not. Paste graphic. Oh. That was probably not what I wanted to do, but that's okay. Ooh. I zoomed in too much now. Oops. But either way, if you have a bunch of these in a row, I mean, it can definitely add into an interesting pattern. All right, so since we are approaching the end of class, if you guys would like to share, I saw Cloud, you wanted to share. That's perfectly fine. Do you want to use your camera for the sharing? Okay, so let me go ahead and give you permission. Okay, perfect. So you are doing a couple different varieties of each of the patterns. I think that's all 4 patterns, right? And I like how you colored the background of it too. So that looks really, really cool. And it's not as boring either. You do have one side that's shaded. It looks like you have just one of the loops shaded on the bottom there. So those are all different types of variety, for sure. And I saw that you did like the opposite colors, I think, on each side or something like that too. It looks really neat. So you can see how you can incorporate it in different designs and different patterns altogether. So very nice. Does anybody else want to share anything if they're able to take a picture of it real quick or anything like that? It's 6:50, so I understand, you know, you guys are probably hungry, probably ready to have dinner. So if you do want to leave, I mean, feel free. But if you want to share, I'll stick around a little bit and see what we can do to have you share. Well, you beat me to it. I haven't had food yet, so. But I can wait. Rhiannon or Peyton, do you guys want to share any of yours? Or are you guys good to go? Okay, perfect. Well, if you guys are all set and ready to go, no questions, then you are free. Have a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll see you guys next Wednesday. Thanks a lot. Thank you, you as well. Enjoy the weather. It's nice and warm out.